Hello, it's Anna and Sophie from Soundyard here. We make Chris Skinner's Countryside podcast, and we've got something very exciting to share with you. We have a new service that's being launched, and it's called Spoken Stories.
Spoken Stories is all about recording the voices and memories of your loved ones in outstanding quality, so they can be enjoyed for generations to come. For example, you know the story that Grandma tells that everyone in the family has heard before. Well, Spoken Stories is about getting those stories down and preserving them for your family history. Spoken Stories is about gifting someone the time to capture these personalities and unique voices.
We record your loved ones' tales, whether it's their whole life story so far or something more specific like a life-changing event. It is a gorgeous experience, and what you're left with is a beautiful monologue that really captures the essence of that person.
Think of it like an audio portrait, and take a listen to a snippet of this one from Diane's spoken story, recorded in her beautiful garden.
I was born in 1951 at Newmarket, and unfortunately I didn't see Mum for a year. I was looked after by a lovely nurse called Diane, my name, because my mum had TB when I was born. And so my mother never worked because with her problem with her, lungs, she had to go and have it sort of pumped up every so often. She used to do a lot of dressmaking, so she always made our clothes years ago. But yeah, she was a lovely mum, yeah, and Dad as well, yeah. That's very nice childhood I had, yeah, very nice. Yeah. I got married February the 16th, 1974. The weather was gorgeous. I ended up having to put on a big sort of T-shirt under my wedding dress I didn't need. I had a lovely one of those transparent umbrellas in case it rained, and it was just a beautiful day. I think I'm always sort of quite cheerful. I mean, if I go down the Luke and deliver some eggs to somebody, I'll meet somebody and chat, and then Paul say, "Where have you been?" I said, "I've been chatting to people." That's just my way. That's just how I am. We've always lived here. We had this built in 1974. They put the footings down in February and we moved in the August. Years ago, I used to go around the village on a bike, and when I had Ian, he'd sit on the back. We live in a lovely area. We've got lovely neighbours. They help us all out, which you all do with neighbours, and that's very, very nice. And as I said to Paul, I'm hoping we can keep this place on until, well, I don't want to move from here until I go out in a brown box. I hope that's not too soon.
If you'd like more information about Spoken Stories and to take advantage of our special introductory offer, you can head to www.soundyard.org/spoken stories.
And keep listening after this episode with Chris, and you'll hear another example of a spoken story. It's a view of the world from a 6-year-old.
Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Countryside podcast. It's nearly 4 o'clock in the morning. Just about getting light. And I'm in one of the old stable blocks here at Hyash Farm. And the horses are back in here. Not the working horses of my childhood. But I suppose you'd call them leisure horses, and the stable is full of horses chomping their hay, the remnants of last night's hay. It's a lovely sound. And a sound not to be missed right above my head are the swallows who we visited a few weeks ago. And they've all got their first broods out and flying about on the meadows right next to the stable block as soon as it's light enough in the morning. And they're going out unescorted now with their parents. And the noise above my head are the male swallows serenading the females and say, come on, I think we've time for at least another brood. And they get on with their life by this lovely dawn chorus. It's still too dark outside and certainly almost pitch black in this stable block. There's no lights on in here. And they're going to have a busy day. The weather's fine. Lots of flying insects out on the pastures, which is why the horses are here. Don't tell the ladies. The poo on the pastures attracts the flies. The flies feed the swallows. So you've got a happy farmer. It is a glorious sound. So Matthew will join me later on this morning. And we're going to be visiting some of the sites on the farm that are always exciting. I have the whole week between one podcast and the next to look round as I'm doing my work on the farm and see what's exciting. And I'm never spoilt for choice at this time of the year. Kind of midsummer. It's difficult to know which way to turn. But above my head, the swallows know just what to do, and they're getting on with their life. And I can't start the day off without saying good morning to my very ancient bantam who's perched up on the hay turner. And she does a little dawn chorus for me every morning. Exciting time for her as well, because I've bought 3 new young bantams. They're called partridge wine spots. Very beautiful. And I'll introduce her to those later on today. Morning. She's a silver wine spot. Right in front of me, doing her own dawn chorus. Are you all right, old girl?
Chris Skinner's Countryside Podcast with Matthew Gudgeon.
This is a bit more like it. Warmth and a fair old dollop of sunshine as well. It's a great pleasure to say that we're once again on High Ash Farm. It's the Countryside Podcast every week. And Chris Skinner, our host and our guide, is back. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Matthew. Welcome to High Ash, and some glorious sunshine above us beating down. Rat, the demented terrier, has joined us this week, and he's headed off across the meadow that we're standing on into a small pine copse there, full of stinger nettles, so I don't think he'll go in there. He's very tender on his underside as far as nettles go.
Aren't we all?
He's coming back to see us, but we're standing on a field on High Ash Farm called Caister Park. It's a good 30 acres in total, and it's grazing land now. And really it's an extension of the Roman town, Ventris Honorum, which is on the west side of this field. And a recent archaeological survey has found the streets and houses and lots of industrial activity right underneath where we're standing. And it's hilly. There's a quarry just over there where obviously a lot of flint to build the Roman fortification around the town walls itself was excavated. And underneath this sandy, chalky soil is a deep layer of chalk, quite a way down, but the pH, the lime content, which we've talked about in previous weeks, is quite high on this soil type, and it's well drained, and it's absolutely perfect for the plant that we're standing in amongst. In a couple of weeks we come back, the field will be blue with speedwell, and this week there's a white glow here, and it's white clover, a very short species of clover which loves being grazed. The more you graze it, the more it reappears.
And that's why you've got some horses here, obviously.
Yes, they'll graze it down. So the first thing to notice is not Rat, the terrier. He has to put his beak in, doesn't he, every week? Because I'm talking to you and he's got jealous. He is so jealous, that's untrue. But if you notice when we look down at the areas of clover all around our feet, the leaves are very green and the grass is also taller. And the patches where there's no clover, the grass looks comparatively impoverished. That's because clover has a huge secret. It's not just the flower and the green and the little trifoliate leaves that spring to mind. It has a relationship with a fungus, a bacteria if you like, in the soil, and it forms little nodules on the roots. And it's true of all members of the pea family, whether it's lupins, all the other clover species, some of the medics, the little sort of minuscule plants that also have trifoliate leaves as well, and so they're all similar, and they will have these nodules on the roots. We looked at one last week as well, which was sainfoin, and another one which was alfalfa or lucerne. They all have these particular types of nodules on the roots. With the case of alfalfa or lucerne, they look like little ladies' fans on the roots, and so they're all different. But it's a huge scientific challenge to try and get those nodules to grow on cereal roots, because nitrogen which is what the nodules fix from the atmosphere, from the air in other words. They fix nitrogen and then the plant can feed it. So it's a kind of symbiotic relationship between the nodule on the roots and the plant itself. And so that's why the clover looks so dark green. It's managed to harvest its own fertiliser, if you like, from the atmosphere, and that's really, really clever. So it forms an important part of pastures, of hay, old traditional hay meadows as well. But as white clover is such a short plant, I suppose the top height of the ones in front of us.
Rat is now eating your clover.
He is, yes. Well, it's meant to be very lucky, really.
A four-leaf clover.
If you find a four-leaf clover, or if you're in the clover, it means you've hit the good times in life. And there's lots of sort of similes come through into our language about it. So you can see the little flower stems are about 4 inches, 100 millimetres tall, pure white, and a kind of pinkish hue. There is another species of clover which is a white clover as well, and it's up to 2 feet tall, and it's rather different to this particular species. That's called Alsite clover. This is just called common or field clover, and it's thriving here as you look away. And of course, once you get to your eye in, there's a honeybee over there in front of us on that one there, just feasting. Another one there. And so you can see in this warm June sunshine that it's yielding lots of pollen and nectar as well, particularly the nectar. And when it comes into flower, it's got a long flowering period as well, so it can start flowering right at the beginning of June and go through easily until the end of July. So it's a top forage plant, and it has this wonderful relationship between the nodules on the roots and the plant itself. And this little yellow flowered one here, just down here, is also another trifoliate, and that's called Black Medic, that one. So they're all quite closely related. So that's growing away, and it's called Black Medic because in a week or two, if you come back and look at those bright little yellow seedy flower heads there, they turn jet black and produce tiny little paper-like seeds again, but they're all related, all these clover species.
And they all coexist?
They coexist, and they love the secret is the pH of the soil has got to be right for them. Clover just won't tolerate acidic soils, whether it's red clover, which is used as a forage crop, whether it's a lucerne, or even the lupins that you might grow in your garden. And of course it's closely related. They're all members of the pea family, if you like, clovers, so they'll have their seeds in pods as well. The leguminous plants, things like peas and beans, they all have in common those nodules on their roots. So when your runner beans are finished, if you like to cut them off at the ground and dig them in, then you'll get the nitrogen release from them in next year's soil, so you can use it as a break crop as well. And farmers are returning to this now and being encouraged under stewardship to grow leguminous crops, which are these members of the clover family, out on arable fields out across the UK at the moment. So it's a very popular plant, not just for us, but for those bees as well. And we've got a few beehives not far away from us, and we're looking towards a bumper crop this year because the soil moisture's just right. The soil's nice and moist underneath. So we are actually having lots of nectar yielded this year in this warm weather that we're having at the moment. Whereas last year we had the heat, we had all the flowers, but they weren't yielding any nectar. So it's rather strange what goes on in the countryside. But there you are, a lovely introduction to this week's podcast and a sight to behold. And just over there in the distance, I can see 2 or 3 or 4 honeybees working away, 2 or 3 on each clover plant. Yes, it's just swarming with them.
It's a glorious square mile of Norfolk countryside that Chris invites us to each week, and the Countryside podcast with Chris Skinner will continue, and our journey will continue.
Yes, it will. And just before we leave this field, there's another little copse of woodland just behind us, Matthew, and if we just stroll over here, there's some sweet chestnut trees now coming into flower. Really interesting because the scientific name of the sweet chestnut was Castanea, and the Roman town, the Romans called it Castra, literally almost the chestnut town.
And they brought chestnuts to this country, didn't they?
They certainly did. That's one of their favourite foods, and they learnt to store them as well, so you could have a good nutritious food source during the winter months. And here we're coming up to a plant. Be careful, there's a rabbit hole there, don't descend down that. And this is a really unusual plant that used to be cultivated across the UK, and it's coming back into fashion. Doesn't look anything at all. It's kind of tall, it's got shiny leaves, and the flower head is about 4 to 6 inches long, about 150 millimetres long, just coming into flower. But it doesn't look anything surprising, and yet it's the source of one of our brightest dyes that in yellow that you can use, and it's been used since Neolithic times, and it's called weld. So really unusual name for a wildflower.
So W-E-L-D.
That's right, yes. And so all parts of the plant were used in the dye manufacturing, and particularly up in Yorkshire it was grown, and again in Essex quite large areas were grown commercially to produce this glorious dye, and it really is absolutely stunning. I've seen clothes dyed with weld, and it's a brilliant colour, almost unreal. So there we are, easy to walk past because it's not what you'd call flamboyant, is it?
It's the season's colour if you're a Neolithic man.
Yes, and of course it down in Thetford, right down in the southwest of our county, there's been a lot of clear felling of coniferous trees, and the Forestry Commission don't replant straight away, they just wait a while, and Weld has recolonised it, as well as a plant we looked at 2 weeks ago, which is Viper's bugloss, and you get this fantastic sort of contrast between the yellow flowers here and the deep blue cobalt flowers of Viper's bugloss, and it's just a glorious sight. They complement each other. I don't know which football team is yellow and blue, but there we are.
It sounds like a bit of a colour clash to me, but this plant sandwiched between two magnificent looking thistles.
Yes, yeah, they're coming out as well. They'll be in flower in about 2 weeks' time. Lots of flower heads in the thistles. Again, it's a good year for them. These are good old musk thistles, so they're deep rooted. They're not really very welcome in the horse pasture, or particularly if you've got them in your hay field and you baled the hay up, and then you'll hear a screech from the hay barn early in the morning when one of the girls gets hold of one of these kind of Scotch thistles, and you hear all sorts of colourful language, and then you'll come and get a complaint as a lady walks up the farmyard holding one of these giant thistles upside down. Found this in my hay.
You should say no extra charge.
No, that's right. I think that's best not to try that one. So there we are. So lovely plants. We've got white clover one side, weld the other, and as you kindly pointed out, a couple of good old thistles there coming into flower in about a week's time.
The ducks at High Ash Farm going in to roost for an evening. Hey everyone, it's Matthew here, and if you've been enjoying our countryside podcasts, we've got a small favour to ask.
Yes, Matthew. What we're going to do is to ask for a small donation to help run the podcast, and any surplus goes for conservation at High Ash Farm here. And so it's really important. We both love to keep the podcast going, and that duck agrees with me, I think.
Well, it's straightforward to donate. You can make a one-off donation or set up a small monthly contribution, and the address is highashfarm.com/podcast.
We're hugely grateful for any support. It means we can keep sharing the stories of the countryside, which I love doing each week, but it's that small amount of costs we need to cover. So thank you very much in advance.
Hey Chris, I've just seen the sun on the oxeye daisies over there. It's absolutely radiant, that, isn't it? Shining like a light.
Yes. Yeah, you've got the patchy cloud, the blue sky, and the sort of sun moving across the field. Yes, unbelievable sight.
Amazing view from here, because there's on the other side wildflowers.
That's the top of Mousehold Hill. If you move to the right, you can see that white dome.
Oh, is that Quebec Road's?
Yeah, yes, Quebec Road and Britannia Barracks, Norwich Cathedral, sticking out above there, and County Hall's just behind these oak trees. That stands out quite nicely as well. You normally see the top of it. And then the wildflowers going away, all sorts of conservation crops in front of us, full of deer as well.
You may have mentioned foxes earlier, Chris.
Yes, I did. On our way here, Matthew, we saw a hen pheasant scurry across one of the farm tracks in front of us with about 15 young pheasants just out of the egg, scurrying along behind Mum, and disappeared in one of the margins. That was a lovely sight, and that started me thinking about predators, something we are very aware of in the countryside. And it's a really kind of thorny issue for some people. Lots of gamekeepers say, anything with a hooked beak is neither good to man or beast. And a gamekeeper nearby, when he heard I was stopping shooting on High Ash Farm, which is a fair old lump of perfectly laid out countryside for game shooting, he said, "Farm will go to rack and ruin," he said. And he said, "You told me I was a waster," every name under the sun. And I was in dread about stopping predator control on High Ash Farm. And a predator is something that really affects the game portion of the farm. Remember, many people were gamekeepers in previous generations and relied on controlling predators out in the countryside. That certainly included foxes, badgers to some extent, certainly carrion crows, jays, anything that eats eggs. And of course, when you stand back and look at what humanity does, we eat lots of eggs. We're top mammal for eating birds' eggs and chickens' eggs and eating chickens, and yet if a fox, for example, gets in the local chicken run, it will kill one and then kill 2 or 3 as a kind of insurance policy. So basically that's how it works. So that gamekeeper, he was pretty hard-nosed, and as he said, only good fox is a dead one. And eventually he changed. It took a long time of farming as the gamekeeper next door to High Ash Farm, and eventually he became quite ill, and sadly he died. And for his funeral, his wife came to see me and said in the latter years of her husband's life, he changed his thinking completely and realised that if you stop predator control, the predators do set out their own territories, so you won't have hundreds of foxes. And on High Ash Farm we've perhaps got 3 fox earths left on the farm, and they kind of form a balance between themselves. And her question to me was, when she came to arrange her husband's funeral, could she have the CD of The Nightingale, which I'd recorded earlier, because her husband had heard me play it on local radio and realised he'd changed his ways completely and had that for his funeral. And that really kind of stopped and made me think and realised that I was perhaps heading in the right way. So earlier this week, one of the ladies was riding along this track we're standing on a newly planted area of woodland, and this strip along here is an acre of wood. The total area is 4 acres, and it's called successional woodland on part of it, and parts planted as well. And that to offset, it's a carbon offset this side of the woodland, and so it's now getting nicely mature. It's dense with brambles, there's young oak trees growing up, and it's a superb area, and it's the ideal habitat for the foxes here at the farm, although clay soil. And just in the wood, only a few yards from where we're standing, is a very well occupied fox earth with 4 cubs in there, and mum and dad feeding the young as well. They're all about 3 months old now, so just under half grown. And the girl riding along the track here stopped her horse, and the fox cubs came out and played right in front of her, and she told me where it was and what they were doing.
So the cubs weren't wary of a human presence?
No, they weren't, and it was late evening. It was just as the sun was setting, so it was about 9:30, and at that time mum and dad had gone out hunting. Dad will bring some food back for the vixen, but not necessarily right to where the earth is. He will have something called a larder, and he'll just cover anything that he's killed up with his nose, and the vixen will know where the larder is. So if she's nursing the cubs and can't really leave the fox earth where she's got the young cubs in, which are pretty well jet black when they're born, the cubs that are here are now getting nicely coloured up. They're deep red, and they play. As soon as mum and dad have gone out hunting, like any kind of teenagers, they are out playing, and it is the most glorious sight. I managed to get my trail cam here and carefully rubbed my hands in grass so there wasn't any scent of soap left on my hands, and I managed to get a beautiful video, and we'll be able to show you that this weekend on High Ash Farm Facebook, and hope to send a copy through to Anna and Sophie at Soundyard as well, so perhaps they can fix up something so you'll be able to actually watch what I saw through the camera lens. And it's in HD, it's in high definition, so you can put it on a 20-inch screen, and it's absolutely beautiful. You're watching mammals, in other words, like us, playing and living in harmony with this area of countryside. And if we just walk up a little bit...
So they're in here somewhere?
They're in here, and we won't go into where the earth is.
I expect Rat can smell them.
Yeah, I'm sure he can. And this is where there's a little area of flattened grass here, and all 4 cubs sit just here. This is where the camera was, just here beside this newly planted tree. And I got them playing in the daytime, and there's some fox poo there.
Well, don't let Rat see that.
No, because he will roll in it and think that's wonderful. And of course, foxes have formed a lot of history through the generations, really, and we're now going to have a general election. Don't groan, everybody, but there can be a further change in legislation about killing foxes, whether they should be shot and controlled, or whether snares, which are still used hugely to kill them, should be banned completely. Most snares now that are sold with what's called a restraint on, so they won't go right tight. But it's really sad how we treat our predators, which form such an important part of biodiversity. And when you stand back and let it all happen itself, because nature at the end of the day knows best, and it's only for the sake of increasing the partridge and pheasant population that we really carry out predator control. And once you address that, and we've just seen a hen pheasant taking all her young chargers out into one of the wildflower margins, and the whole place is stuffed with pheasants. I won't say it's stuffed with foxes because they control each other. We've only got 1 pair of carrion crows on the entire square mile of High Ash Farm, and if any other carrion crows try to nest in their territory, they pull the nest to pieces or just see them off. So that's what you call kind of territorial possession, if you like. And so it's a really interesting conversation to have about humans' relationship with wildlife, and calling foxes vermin. We call some of our other mammals vermin as well. You can have hares shooting for part of the year, and then suddenly at the end of February you can carry on shooting them, but you can't sell them, and at that point they're classed as vermin, which is really, really weird and really interesting. So we need to really look at all the game laws to go back to realise that we're still shooting woodcock, which has now become a red list species, and the relationship between us harvesting them. Same with snipe, pheasants, partridges. It all needs to be looked at, because the laws that were formed, the game laws from years and years ago, are now hugely outdated, as we're putting so much pressure on our beautiful countryside that really it needs to be redressed, and perhaps the current election coming up will help to do that in future months and years.
You could always stand for Parliament.
I could do. I've got some fantastic ideas. And speaking of fantastic, there was a book I used to read my children over and over again. It was called Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Oh, yes. And Roald Dahl.
Roald Dahl. And there's 3 farmers starring in it. Boggis, Boggis, Bunce and Bean were the three notorious farmers, and the fantastic Mr. Fox got the better of them every time. I loved it, and the children loved it. Over and over again I read that book. I can nearly repeat it word for word. And it was Gilbert White that rode his horse. In his journal he commented on it in January. And the foxes are very rank at this time of the year, he said, and you can still detect where they were the previous night as you ride your horse round the village. Love it. So lots and lots of history.
I think your foxes, I can't smell them at all. So they've obviously
the wind
had
is this way.
The underarm deodorant on.
Believe me, that smell is being blown away from us, and it's pretty high near the earth. There'll be carcasses of all sorts of animals and squirrels as well. And there we are. So rats, the wind is blowing away and he hasn't detected it. But do enjoy that video. It is breathtakingly beautiful to see young foxgloves playing and learning to hunt as well. It's stunning.
And we've got some letters, haven't we?
We have. We better get back to the truck and get through some of the questions. Here, come here, here. I don't know what he's got. Here.
Oh, he's got a little dog
that's
biscuit.
A lady gave him that yesterday, and he
down in the
he
footwell.
Here, come here, up, come here, up, Ratty, up, come on, up, here. Right. He wants to frequent your lap.
Well, we'll stay in the truck and answer a few of the emails that have come through, and we're always absolutely delighted to receive them. It's terrific how many people do contact the podcast, and just sad we can't mention everyone on the air, but every one of them does get read by Chris. Mary and Dave live at Holly Farm in Silfield. We thought you may be interested to see what we think is a lizard orchid. After listening to your podcast last week, this was one of our fields, and it was in it where we have had a lot of bee orchids, but this year very few, although 5 have popped up in a little bit of grass near our home in exactly the same place as last year. We have a lot of rabbits, hare and deer, and wonder if some of the bee orchids have been browsed off. We've sown the wildflower seeds that we got from you a bit late this year, as it's been so wet and difficult to get on the land, but germination looks good, so hopeful for the future. And Mary and Dave, regular listeners, and there's a photograph they've sent us.
Yes.
So that's a lizard orchid?
And it certainly is. That's a real rarity. Again, it likes high pH soil. It was thought to be extinct around about 1900, about 125 years ago or so. And then we had a series of quite mild winters, 1920 through to the late 1930s, and it started to reappear on some of its old sites. So obviously the seed had survived, and about 20 years ago there were recorded about 800 lizard orchids, and now we're over the 3,000 mark, so it's really getting quite inhabited about the UK again, but really weird. And it's a lizard lookalike. It's also called the giant goat orchid because it can be over 2 feet tall because of its smell. It's not the most pleasant smell. It smells pretty much of goats.
Here's one from Gillian. Hello, Gillian Handyside, who has sent an email to say, can I ask 2 questions about swifts? Now, I'm sure you're delighted to read anything about swifts. Gillian says, am I right in thinking when a pair of swifts are zooming around the sky at top speed, they keep in contact by calling to each other, and there's a difference of about half a tone between their contact calls?
Yes, there certainly is between the male and the female, and often the female's flying in front of the male and her call's slightly higher. And the reason she's flying in front of the male is that usually occurs, that screaming, when they're going to mate, and they mate, wait for it, on the wing. The male folds his wings vertically, and she carries on flying as he perches on her back, and that's how they mate. So really well observed and well heard as well. I've recorded lots of them lots of times.
And Gillian goes on to say, given that swift nesting sites in buildings are disappearing because of cavities in old buildings being blocked up and new builds being pretty much hermetic, Have either of you seen swifts returning to nest on cliff faces as they used to before the advent of buildings? Well, I certainly haven't.
No, I haven't seen them, but there are records in some of the old quarries around the countryside of swifts nesting in them. In European countries, they will nest in holes as well quite regularly in old cliff faces, different species of swifts. So, as it rightly says, we're trying to exclude birds from modern buildings particularly. It is difficult for them, and many of the new houses as well don't have the little nooks and crannies for the swifts to be able to fly in under the tiles. They don't really build nests of their own like many birds.
We heard a little bit of rap there, and
We did.
Miranda says, my dog Esther and I listen both together every week, and we love hearing Rat's adventures.
Yes. So, yes, he's very entertaining and very naughty. So he's down in a footwell now, but he's not thriving on the lack of attention, and he's making all sorts of weird noises now.
Miranda lives in West Yorkshire and has sent us a video and a picture. I found this in my garden. It was very small, taken with a macro lens. And it was attached, and you can see the movement inside. The next day it had dried out and I presume hatched or left. And there's the photo of what looks like, is that a larva of some sort of insect?
Yes, and I had a little struggle to find out exactly what it was, and it's the pupal case of an earwig. And there are several species of earwigs.
Oh, my goodness.
And so really well photographed. And of course, after the larva had left and become an adult earwig from its case that it was pupated in, then the case then dries up and just leaves almost the shape of it, and you can see the eyes, and it's almost a perfect shape of an adult earwig. That's the larval case, so well spotted. So there we are.
Looks like a shriveled prune.
Yes, if you like to put it like that. Yes.
Well, thank you, Miranda. And hello to David Martin. National Jackdaw Day, he suggests. I enjoy hearing the jackdaws at the start of last week's episode when Chris was up and about very early. I think,
Yes,
was it very late?
No, it's quite late on that particular one.
And here in Crowborough, he says, East Sussex, we're near the Ashdown Forest, and we're very well endowed with jackdaws and all sorts of crows. We often hear flocks of jackdaw calling in the late evening, but today, the 12th of June, they've been flying around in large numbers and calling all morning. I was wondering why this is. Perhaps the parents are taking their young out and call to keep in touch.
And that's exactly what's happening. You're having all the family groups starting to congregate together. It's happening as well with starlings as well at this time of the year. They start to form the seeds of the big murmurations you'll see later on in the year. And jackdaws and will do exactly the same. They're very gregarious members of the crow family, and you'll get lots of them together. And once the family groups start forming and you get 100 or so jackdaws together, the original parents of their offspring will call them and try and keep them nearby. And of course it's like a cacophony once they all start. And the other thing that happens is late evening they'll all start roosting together, which we got an enormous roost here at High Ash Farm, and the biggest corvid roost in Europe is not far away from us, just on the east side of Norwich.
You've been emailed by Tim Rice.
Wow.
I wonder.
I wonder too. Yes.
Tim listens in Kent and enjoys the podcast. We have a blackbird in our garden which fledged about 2 weeks ago, the only one as far as I could see. It's now the size of his parents, who were diligently feeding it up to a few days ago. I've noticed it spends its nights and quite a bit of the daytime in its old nest and comes out for a short flight, occasionally to feed in a nearby juneberry. It certainly appears to be contented with this routine. Is it unusual behaviour to return to the nest, though?
Yes, some birds will do that, but in the case of blackbirds, it is unusual. They normally leave the nest, and perhaps the first day or two they might go back in, but after that they generally leave the nest. Parents will build a new nest and perhaps have a second brood. Perhaps it's already an offspring from a second brood and it's just using the nest for security, but it's a little bit unusual for it to be by itself. Normally with blackbirds they'll rear 2 or 3 that get to fledging, but there could be a cat about, and the blackbird has had a few near escapes and decided that the nest is best.
And thanks to Tim Dickinson and also to Oliver Downs, we both enjoyed your emails as well. And Tim's talking about enhancing the wilder offerings in his garden. He says we have an impressive collection of birds, mammals and plants now doing well. Kingfishers, kestrels, orchids, hedgehogs and bats. Isn't that terrific? They're in Chorley.
Wow, absolutely fantastic. And of course, you start to get addicted to your own little patch and look after it and love it.
Do you speak from experience?
Yes, of course. From mine, and it's a rather large patch. We're looking over parts of High Ash Farm now, and as far as you can see, it's high ash. And I realise I'm very, very privileged, and to have the whole variety of wildlife which we have at High Ash Farm. So thank you for all those emails. It's always lovely to receive all that correspondence. I'm sorry we don't get through it all, but we have a jolly good go.
Chris at countrysidepodcast.co.uk, and Chris is so computer literate, he sorts it all out, don't you, and puts it in different files and keeps it on discs and things.
Have you seen the size of my fingers? I think sausages come to mind. I've yet to turn a computer on in my life and yet to turn one off. So that's how literate I am in the modern world.
Well, you make up for it in so many other ways, Chris, and I'm already looking forward to next week when we'll be edging towards July. Incredible.
I know. The year is slipping through our fingers. Make the most of June. It's a glorious month, and the countryside, wherever you live, will entertain you.
This is a Soundyard production. Music is by Tom Harris.
Hello, it's Anna and Sophie from Soundyard here. Our new service, Spoken Stories, is an incredible experience where we record the stories and voice of your loved one, which you can then hold on to forever.
It makes for an incredible gift, and anyone can make one. Take a listen to this. It beautifully captures the thoughts and feelings of life from a 6-year-old's perspective.
I'm 6 years old and I love running around. I can run very, very fast, but I'm even faster on my bike. That's why I love biking. It makes me feel energetic, and also I bike loads of places. I like doing sports like dodgeball. The people that are in charge in the world, well, I think that there should be no one in charge at all, so everyone's in charge, so there's no person that's in charge, so everyone is a bit more free. That's what I think. Well, what I try to change at the moment is global warming. It's when us humans litter, destroy the planet and all its nature. That's global warming. It makes me feel sad. And also, if us humans keep doing that, it could destroy the whole planet Earth, and then all of the human beings will be destroyed. I try to stop global warming, and also in my coat pocket I have a bit of Kit Kat litter I found on the floor once. I love the planet more than anything. Grown-ups should be stopping global warming. Because grown-ups are more powerful than kids. But if kids can be more powerful than grown-ups, kids and grown-ups can work together and do it. Kids should be able to do the same things as grown-ups. They should have more rights. Well, I love myself because that I believe in a lot of things. That's what I love about myself. I like being a kid, but because when I'm a grown up, I'm gonna have my own kids because that's what I want. And also, I'm a bit worried to have kids, and I'm still gonna be a kid for like a long time. So I'm glad that's actually gonna happen. I'm glad I'm gonna stay a kid for a long time. I'm gonna have kids because I want to know what it feels like to be a parent. I'm gonna be a good parent.
Isn't that just gorgeous? If you'd like to find out more about recording a spoken story of your own, or you'd like to buy this as a present for someone, take a look at our website, www.soundyard.org/spoken stories, and take advantage of our introductory offer. Alternatively, you can get in touch via email, hello@soundyard.org.
And if the internet isn't an option, you can leave a message with your details on our landline number. It's 01603 273 899, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.